Stress on the back 40. Isn't it idyllic here on the back 40? Nothing can go wrong. Or can it? What's pushing up our rural stress levels? Well, we're going to talk about that and so much more today on the Rural Well. Whether you're joining us while changing a diaper, feeding cows, or trying to get to your next committee meeting, we have the well-being of rural areas like yours in mind when building this and more episodes. Welcome to the Rural Well. And today we're going to talk about, well, I don't know. Lauren, what are we going to talk about?
Bridget, that's awesome. I think on the top of the list is we've got to talk about stress.
Oh, yours or mine? Or no, wait, that's everybody. But go to the back 40.
I don't actually want to talk about mine. I don't really want to talk about my stress because then I would have to really look at it, right? Like I'd have to spend some time. It's interesting. You and I were just chatting kind of off camera about this term ruggers. What is a rugger?
Yes.
Okay. So for our listeners out there, off the top of your head, what do you think a rugger is? I use the term often with farmers. What do you think, Bridget?
When you first said that, my first thought was, Are we trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes, like including our own, where we're just trying to hide from the problems? But I don't think that's how you use the term ruggers.
It's not, but I like it. I think we should come up with another term because that's very, very valid. But ruggers are when farmers, they kind of lift up the rug, they sweep all the stuff underneath and they drop the rug hoping everything magically disappears. And oftentimes when we talk about, the issues farmers face and the stress they're facing, that's what they're doing. That's what we do. In order to survive, we just sweep all of the stuff that we can't handle right now under the rug and we just hope it magically disappears. Or we sweep all of the historical stress or the historical wounds or the hard things under that rug and we hope it just magically disappears. But we know it doesn't. Like there's no magical rug.
Okay, hold on though, Lauren. You're a licensed therapist in Ontario. You are a PhD candidate going forward to continue to help folks in all of these areas. Are you going to be at the end able to tell us a silver bullet how to make that stress go away?
No, absolutely not.
All right.
There's no silver bullet, but there are a number of things that we can do to manage stress. And one of the things that we need to do is understand how we look at stress, and we need to look at it differently. Kelly McGonigal is a phenomenal researcher, and she wrote this book called The Upside of Stress. And so we're going to chat about that a little bit more today.
Tell me about her book.
Oh my goodness. Actually, you know what? If you go online to YouTube, she does a TED Talk and it is like phenomenal. In fact, we'll put it in the show notes because it's mind-blowing to me. She talks about the number of people that have died in the United States. And the number of people that have died in the United States of worry, right? Or of stress, worry of stress. It's not the actual stress, it's how you perceive the stress. And so when we experience stress, if we can say, okay, that's our body preparing for stress and stress isn't horrible for us, this is how we, prepare for a tough experience, but I'm going to get through this experience. I've done hard things before, so I can do hard things again. That's actually a very healthy profile for a cardiovascular heart, kind of snapshot. The problem comes when we go, oh my goodness, I'm under so much stress, and we allow ourselves to just really get overwhelmed and we get in this place of what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And so it's interesting to me because there are a lot of people in this world that handle a lot of stress, and farmers are no exception. When I look at what the average farmer is carrying when it comes to debt levels, climate impacts on, like right now, we just had a minor hurricane come down in Ontario. And so my beans are underwater right now. You guys have had flooding in the Midwest. After years and years of drought, right? Like it's nutty. So there's debt, and there's weather, there's global trade impact, which I don't know enough about, but I can tell you that it is a major issue. Within, like, globally, we're not talking about one country to another. We're talking globally.
But it's the spotlight that's turning inward on us too. So if we're going to talk about where's stress coming from on the back 40, one of those things is this current green initiative on how we all need to farm differently, lower our carbon scores, etc. I have a whole rant that can go on about that. But all of that changes our perspective of what our parents dealt with when they were running our farms.
Yeah.
And man, it's not going to get less. I think that's the thing that we have to think about. You mentioned globally, there is a great economist forecaster. His name is Peter Zeihan, Zeihan, and he also does things on YouTube. And I just finished reading his book, and he said between now and the year 2040, with de-globalization and what's going to happen when it comes to shipping, transportation, parts availability for our equipment, and even just how we get food to processors, that is going to change. We're going to see increased stress levels on our farmers, on our consumers, and we will probably see more famine.
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, especially because the distance between the producer and the consumer has grown so much that we have far too many people that really just don't understand that connection, that the importance of what farmers face. And when we see the global call for reduced carbon, and certainly we need to take care of our environment. I am not saying for a minute we don't take care of our environment, but if we get to the place where we're not really informed about these issues and decisions are being made from an or poorly informed perspective, we really run the risk of doing damage long term. You're not going to see, I don't think, you're not going to see this damage from year to year, but you're going to see it, and it's going to be very difficult to just spring back from, right?
I still think those are all of some of those stress levels, and you're right, we can't ignore them. What we can think about is, what can we do to change some of them? So here's where I'm probably going to surprise you and ask this question. If as a farmer yourself, but also as a therapist, what would be the ideal structure in a farmer's life to either help reduce that stress or to help deal with it? Would that be
Great question.
Weekly counseling sessions? What does that look like?
Well, I don't know that weekly counseling sessions are, it's likely not doable for most. I'm not saying that there's many that would benefit from it. There's many farmers that I do see weekly or bi-weekly mostly, depending on the situation. We know that suicide among farmers is really far too high. It's 2 times, in Canada, it's 2 times plus the national average. In the US, I think it's more like 4 times the national average or something to that effect. So it's even higher in the US. And I can tell you, I was speaking last week to a farmer in Minnesota, dairy farm in Minnesota, and the calls he's getting week to week are bleak, really bleak. So certainly, yeah, we do need to access some counseling for sure. One of the things that as farmers, kind of across the board, we need to practice is self-compassion, which sounds like a really fluffy answer. But what I see oftentimes is farmers are punishing themselves continually for not quite meeting that mark. It's a mark that we set. It's unrealistic expectation, and we set it on ourselves, and we use it all the time to try and motivate us, and it grows anxiety, which leads to depression, and all of those pieces are it's like this trickle down effect. I tell people, I don't know have you ever been to like Buffalo, New York to see the falls, the Niagara Falls?
I haven't, but I know where you're going with it, so keep at it.
Yeah, well, and I mean, if you look upstream, the river doesn't look dangerous at all. Like, it really doesn't. In fact, I've sat there, I've been like, oh man, I could swim against that. That's no big deal. Right? But when you go over the falls, the cascading effect is so huge and just powerful. And so for us as farmers, if we could get to the place where we start to say, wait a minute, that's just unrealistic. That's not doable. That's not humanly possible. Or if we get to the place where we can say, I'm still learning. That's okay. I made it. Everybody makes a mistake. It's a shared human experience. We would be so much further ahead.
So I think of two things when we're talking about how we can help folks find those resources, et cetera. And a couple of them that came to mind, you mentioned telemed, which I think has really grown, especially post-pandemic. The downside is, whether we're in Canada or the US, our ability for broadband internet is still poor in our remote areas. You and I both know that if we make it a challenge, whereas someone has to sit in their pickup in their pasture in order to get a good phone signal, they're not going to make the effort to get that done the way they should. The in-person side of that, though, this is one thing that just breaks my heart. I spoke to a group in southern Minnesota last year, and a woman came up to me saying, I'm graduating, I'm going to be a therapist, I'm ready to go help in ag. But I don't think I can set up an office in my town of 3,000 people because everybody knows everybody and they recognize the vehicles, and farmers don't want to park outside my office and be seen. So I think I literally have to now make house calls to the farm in order to connect with my customer. Okay, so as a licensed therapist, Lauren, what goes through your mind when I bring up those two items?
Well, truth, quite frankly, So number one, I have a number of therapists that have said to me, I'd like to go visit people on the farms. And my advice is talk to your insurance company, make sure that you've got proper coverage. And in our training, we haven't mentioned this yet, but we did a training called Agriculturally Informed Therapy training for therapists to know how to work effectively with farmers. And it's honestly fantastic training. It's worth continuing education credits, yada, yada, yada. But in it, we talk specifically about if you go to the farm, these are some boundaries that you need to set to ensure that, that it's really profitable for your client and protective for the therapist. So yes, therapists are able and can go to farms. You have to keep in mind the travel time. I have customers that are 3 hours from any kind of location where there would be enough population to justify a practice. So certainly there are still barriers to that. And in fact, there was some research that came out of Australia from Caitlin Viro, and she talks about the technology gap. Many of my clients are over the age of 50. They're old farmers looking for support, particularly in transitioning the farm from one generation to another, or historic trauma, historic issues that have really kind of come to the surface now. And we see that all the time because, you're raising your kids and you're doing the best of your ability, not realizing that, they're stuff. And so now they're 25 and relationships are really frayed and we need to figure this out. So that's not uncommon to have an older age group individual coming to seek out services. So, certainly technology is a barrier. My advice is, or I don't want to say my advice. I would just say no, Bridget. But
okay,
my idea behind finding support for farmers starts with things like this podcast, because there's a lot of tools that we can share that a farmer doesn't need to go for a session for. Farmers are so good at implementing strategies. And at least in my private practice, I've been gobsmacked, honestly. I'll have a farmer come in one week. They leave with a list of 3 things to do. And the next time they come back, they're like, okay, check. That was really helpful. This is what I found helpful. This is what worked. This is what didn't work. And then we're on to the next thing. And we're like, okay, try that, And so I find that for the most part, farmers are implementers, right? And I, as a farmer myself, I find that. I mean, if somebody gives me a task to do to make something better on my farm, my sheep health or whatever, like when I call my vet and he gives me advice, I jump through the hoops that are needed to implement that. So that's one of the strengths of farmers.
That's a great strength.
It's
because they're willing to be the doers. Okay. I want to back up when we talk about what are the stressors that can happen to the back 40, to those of us who are in the farm communities. First of all, it's not just the farmer, it's the banker, it's the grain elevator manager, it's the hardware store owner, it's all of those people that go through the farm economy cycles with the farmers too. So it's not just about the farmer, it's about everybody in their sphere. And when it comes to the farm, that stress doesn't just have to be outside influences, commodity prices, weather, etc. There's that on-farm stress. And you mentioned just the tip of the iceberg with transition planning, Loren, but family. If you have children who may have disabilities and who need extra help, if you are struggling in a relationship with your spouse or your significant other, how do we work through that? And do you tackle that differently with any of your clients than what you would do when they're just thinking about those outside pressures?
Well, the majority of my clients are farmers, probably at least 90%. The other group I work with are foster and adoptive families, actually. So do we tackle it differently? We tackle every situation differently. And that's one of the beauty of farmers, right? Like what's struggling, and you can think of your own consultation experience. When you go to a farm, you look at that farm. What are the strengths of this farm? What is this farmer bringing to the table? And what are the specific needs? The reason for that is there is no cookie cutter approach. And I think that's the challenging thing when it comes to wellness is we need to get to a place where we're willing to embrace whatever it takes for us to be who we want to be, to get to that place of healing or to get to that place on that journey where we feel satisfied. And that's a different story for everyone. But certainly I think in relation to your question is, do we tackle it differently? We do, because it's a whole different skill set that comes in agriculture than what comes in my urban population people that I would work with.
By the way, I really appreciate how you train other therapists, just what you said about being able to work within that agriculture population, because it makes an incredible difference when you talk to someone who can empathize. They don't have to sympathize, but if they can empathize with those pressures that happen within this industry, that can be very different. They're not all different, but they can be.
They can. And beyond empathy, we actually move into a place of compassion. And I think as an agriculture community, we need to be willing to move into a place of compassion for one another and then for ourselves. Compassion motivates us to change.
Yeah.
Empathy, it's fantastic. We can sit with people. We don't have to fix it. And farmers are fixers by nature, right? But when we're moved by compassion, we change the trajectory for people and for ourselves. It's this higher level of empathy where we join in with people. It's really kind of an incredible place to be.
So I like solutions. I'm very much a doer and a solutions focused person.
Yeah. Or maybe let me ask you this. In your work with farmers, when you see them experience a lot of stress, what are the signs first that you would notice that something is even in need of, like, okay, well, wait a minute, there's some stuff going on here. What do you notice?
Okay, that's a great question. I got trained as a salesperson a long time ago to make sure to look people in the eye and give a firm handshake. You know what I do notice is when folks can't look me in the eye, when they're so uncomfortable talking about how are things going. They look down. You can read it in their body language. And that's one of the first things I notice. If I know that individual well, I can hear in their voice the sadness. You can listen to some of the stories that they tell. This morning, I had a crop consultant reach out to me, and he just said, my farmers are so done. All of this rain that's happened, it literally, you walk out the door and you can smell the rotting crop. Yeah, because it's so wet. And he said, I just feel like I'm ready for winter. And I knew that those were his words telling me that he just needed to talk for a little while. And if you just give a little silence, maybe ask a question or two and then give the chance for silence, folks will start to open up. But it's always their body language that I really read. If it's someone that I didn't know very well and I maybe, it's been a long time since I saw Joe. I wonder how they are. I wonder where they're at. Joe's been giving a lot of things away to his kids. Like he's getting ready to pass them along. Joe hasn't been able to focus, hasn't maybe been paying some of his bills in town. those would be things that I would notice about a fellow farmer and say, I think I should maybe drive out there and just ask if we could visit over the fence, ride in the buddy seat. But I think you have a better list than I do.
No, actually, you've hit the nail on the head. We really break it down into 3 different categories. There's behavioural, which is what you talk about when somebody stops doing regular behaviors that they would normally do. So if every Sunday you saw somebody in church and then they weren't in church anymore, if every Friday morning you would go to coffee and have coffee with somebody, right? If you saw the person who is normally, even animal husbandry, right? If you visit somebody's farm and you're like, wow, like the farm's really gone downhill in the past few months. Those are all indications.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always an opportunity for you to check in. Now, bearing in mind that most often it'll get pushed off. Like, oh, how you doing, Joe? Oh, I'm fine. I always say, people say, well, what are the closed-ended questions? So those are questions that you can end usually yes or no. And then I add fine, because it happens all the time. How are you doing? Fine.
Fine.
We didn't really get any information from that fine. Right?
No.
How are you doing? Fine. How are the feet?
Honestly,
Fine.
You have to keep asking, because I'm with you. If someone just says, "Oh, I'm fine," that's okay. That gave me nothing. Well, really, tell me more. Or what stage are your beans at? Have you had some drown out acres? Or if it's the opposite situation, are they kind of burning up in the heat these days? What's it looking like? How does your crop compare now versus last year?
Yeah.
I think the fact that they hear someone cares more than just casual surface conversation matters.
Yeah, it is. It's taking that extra step, right? And just really getting curious. Curiosity is such a beautiful tool that we can use. One of the other things we see, so we see kind of that behavior, and then we see emotional dysregulation where somebody's crying and angry and like all those emotions are everywhere. There's a video that I usually show in some of the training, speaking opportunities I get. And it's this picture of a farmer, and he's being told, you get down, you get dirty, you do the hard work and all those things. But meanwhile, you see a picture of this farmer put his arm across his workshop table and slide all of the tools go flying. And I'm like, that's actually a sign that somebody's not doing very well. And the message we don't want to send is work harder, dig deeper. It's all up to you. And that's unfortunately the message that has been shared so many times when it comes to the stress level that farmers are facing.
And we can't.
And we can't. Yeah, that's right.
So when I speak to groups, I tell this story. I mentioned before that I grew up on a dairy farm. And so in the late 80s, North Dakota was in a pretty severe drought. Hay was expensive. That was also a time frame with fairly high interest rates.
Yes.
A lot of things had been happening in the ag economy that were Debbie Downers. Mm-hmm. Well, my dad decided to get out of dairy, and we sold our dairy cows. As the oldest of 4 kids, every day we had been in charge of helping milk and feed calves, but then those cows were gone. Mm-hmm. And Dad still had things to do in his day when it came to taking care of beef animals or putting in a crop. But now he had this gap of time. And so my dad started doing the laundry. And with 4 kids, he did a lot of laundry. But now that I'm older, I realize what my dad was doing was struggling with depression. And it may have been a situational depression because he felt like he'd failed, like those dairy cows had to leave because of something he had done. I didn't have the words at 15 years old to describe depression. I do now. And I am ever so grateful that I do. And especially that folks like yourself, Loren, have helped the rest of us learn to have those words and those conversations. We don't have to dig deep because it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, Bridget, I don't think we could say it any better than what you did there. There are times where it's okay to not be okay all of the time. And stress really plays a role in that. But we can't, one of the most interesting things about the brain is when we want to make a new pathway, if we want to choose differently, it takes 1,000 times to do that. Unless we have humor, then it only takes 40 times. So humor is like one of our greatest tools. And I think about my old neighbor. His name was Joe. And Joe, he was a good farmer. And I remember him talking to me about different things and the humor, and he would take everything in stride. And the year he was trying to take off his beans, and we had seeded down with pasture underneath, and the pasture had grown well, and it was growing up in the combine. It was a bit of a mess, but I think about those stressors he faced, and he was a big jolly man, and he would take everything in stride. And so with that, we're going to kind of stride on over to something else, and we're going to enter into switching gears, and we're going to not play the game. We're not going to play the game, but we're going to talk about this segment called Catch a Phrase. And we're going to share a quote and see what we think it might mean or who it might apply. So the quote says, "What you see depends on how you view the world. To most people, this is just dirt. To a farmer, it's potential." What do you think of that quote?
There is a part of me that always wishes I had been a homesteader coming out west on the railroad or a covered wagon.
Yes!
And
I belong in a little house on the prairie time, except for wearing a dress. Yes. I could never have worn a dress.
I would.
My mom tells the story. You're in pants too. I would have been one of the women wearing pants up on the horse. Absolutely. My mom tells the story of one year she made this like beautiful dress. I have red hair. It was brown. It was so adorable. And I did not want to wear a dress to school. And she literally, I was there clinging on to the side of the car as she had my legs, and she was trying to tug me out to get me into school. And I got into school, and I cried the whole time. And my mom came to get me. And you want to know the next time I wore a dress to school?
I was just saying, maybe the prom?
Yeah, right. Yes. Well, I mean, besides prom and graduation, it was actually when I was in grade 12, and I was doing a presentation, and I wore a little black dress. That was the next time I wore a dress to school. So I'm with you. I can homestead with the rest of them if I can wear pants. Only if I can wear pants.
That's what I think about, is how others say, like you mentioned in that quote, it's just a piece of dirt. Oh, no, it's not. There is potential. There's potential in there like there is in every single one of us. And it's those of us who choose to till the soil and labor for it that bring out the most potential.
Yeah. The key word that I notice in there, or the key phrase, is how you view the world. And I think how we view the world, how we change our view on even stress, how we change our view on the fact that our crops are drowning right now. And I'm not trying to invalidate that. I'm not trying to minimize that, because it's catastrophic. It's just devastating. And yet how we view the world changes our trajectory. We see potential where other people see wastage. We see hope where other people see abyss, right? Or nothing.
Yes.
It's actually, I think, one of the resilient factors for farmers is we are always looking for potential. I woke up this morning thinking about, the farm business. What else could we do to make a little bit more money on the farm? I'm sure I'm not alone in that as farmers. I think I'm pretty sure all of us think that. I could be alone, but I don't think so. And so I am always looking, for potential. And it's one of the resilient attributes of being a farmer.
That is so true, because farmers are eternal optimists, and we just keep looking for the next thing. Yes. Yeah, we do.
Yeah. We don't have to be alone, and we don't have to be without support. We don't have to be without being vulnerable at the same time. Right? Like that's the message that's been lost. We've thought that we have to be optimistic, and we do, but we can do it and still say this is hard. We can do it and still say I'm struggling.
So as we do this podcast, I love the fact that you mentioned humor. Humor will help us remember something. Okay. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we remembered was just one last question. And I will tell you my secret right now. I have this really great thing I keep on my desk, and it's called the chat box. And it is a box full of little tiny cards with questions on them. And they're designed if you have people over and you get stuck in conversation. But I've used this in a multitude of interviews, things that I do in social media to just prompt one more memorable moment. And I have one for you as we get to our last question for today. So When folks think of where we live in Canada and the US, they think we completely live under a blanket of snow all year long. And we do not.
I often get told, how's my igloo, right?
Right.
Crossing back into Canada, and I've been down in Florida or something, and they're like, oh, like how cold is it up there? We live like south of the top of California, actually, in our area where we live. So we're the banana belt.
You are. Where you are in Ontario is like living in Nebraska. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So just randomly, I chose this question, and I think that this is quite perfect for you and I. If snow could fall in a flavor, what flavor would you choose?
If snow fall in oh my goodness. Okay, my first question is, how do we make that happen? Like,
oh, yes.
I've heard other people saying that they are throwing things up into the atmosphere to change the weather patterns. Maybe they could put a flavor up there while they do it. I don't know. But I think, what flavor would it be? I mean, my go-to is strawberry because I love vanilla frozen yogurt with one strawberry in it. But my other go-to would probably be pizza. And I don't know if that would be delightful for other people, but like pizza flavored snow. I think it could work. I don't know.
I don't disagree with you. And I'm with you. My first thought was I went right to ice cream. And apparently there is an 80-year-old woman in this body, because my first thought of a flavor is that it should be maple nut, but I hope the walnuts don't hurt when they hit you.
Yeah.
So that was my first thought.
Yeah.
Then you said pizza, and now I just thought, oh, I think I want beef stew then, if I get that option.
Oh, yeah. Huh.
Yeah. So
they're piled up and stored for a while. We just had to go and scoop it. It could work.
Yes. If my snowbanks were maple nut ice cream, the winter would be lovely.
So much lovelier. So much lovelier. It's true.
Oh, okay. So
I love that question.
That's the type of questions you're going to get from me if I get to ask the last question as we go forward. And I have a whole box of them. So this ought to be fun.
That's so cool.
All right. So folks, we are going to wrap up, but we want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And check out the show notes, because we made mention of an author that we want you to look at. I think we want to make sure that websites are included, because we both have a strong connection to helping farmers and talking about their stress, their mental health, their attitudes, and anything else that can be improved. And we're here to do that. So thanks for joining us on The Rural Well.
Thanks so much, folks. Hey, folks. We are so glad that you joined us on The Rural Well. And we hope that you found a nugget of wisdom in our chat today. But listening to our podcast is a drop in the bucket if you are struggling. So we encourage you to reach out in whatever way you are able to ensure that you get the help that you need to thrive. If at any time you are in crisis and cannot keep yourself safe or your loved one safe, please call 911 or visit your nearest hospital. We are delighted that you chose to spend your time with us, and we want to hear from you. So drop us a note and be sure to tune in next time to The Rural Well, and remember, you were made to thrive.